Welcome to this Saturday's Travel and History Tip, and this week will be part one of a three-part series on the Grands. An era of innovation, social change, and tourism. By 1869, the first industrial revolution had already transformed nearly every aspect of society with the introduction of the steam engine and the telegraph. Inventions as humble as the waffle iron or as magnificent as the Suez Canal made their debuts alongside the cog that year. The cog, remember we did a three-part series on the cog railway and our friend David Clifford, who is a machinist for the cog. But perhaps most consequential of all was the completion of the Transcontinental Railway at Promontory, Utah on May 10th. Robber Baron and Central Pacific Railroad President Leland Stanford drove the golden spike that symbolized the joining of a great iron road from Omaha and points east all the way to San Francisco and the Pacific Ocean. The social fabric of the nation was changing as well. The 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was proposed in 1869 and was ratified the following year. The amendment states that the right to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, thereby granting voter rights to freed slaves, but notably not to women. And in New York City, reformer and women's rights activist Susan B. Anthony formed the National Women's Suffrage Association in May of that year. The Wyoming Territory, not yet the 44th state, became the first organized political entity in the country and the first in the world to guarantee women the right to vote in 1869. Here is a poster from 1869 of that grand event. Railroad from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Grand opening, Union Pacific Railroad, Platte Valley route, Omaha through to San Francisco. In North Platte, Nebraska, which is located in central Nebraska, find the Union Pacific Bailey Yard in North Platte. It is the world's largest railroad classification yard. Around 16,000 rail cars pass through the sprawling yard each day. The 7th floor of the Golden Spike Tower at the yard has open-air viewing, and the 8th floor has an enclosed 360-degree viewing area where we thoroughly enjoyed listening to a knowledgeable retired railroad worker explain the workings of the rail yard. Union Pacific Railroad is headquartered in Omaha. The Union Pacific Railroad Museum is exquisitely done, and it is located in Council Bluffs, across the Missouri River from Omaha. The history of the railroad company and its role in the development of the West are presented at this multi-floored locale. See items from the rail car that carried President Abraham Lincoln's body to Springfield, Illinois, from Washington, D.C. Quality interactive displays engage visitors of all ages. Also, on a hilltop, there is a monument on Lafayette Avenue that is dedicated to Abraham Lincoln's visit to Council Bluffs and the celebrated railroad. Amasa Leland Stanford was born near Albany, New York in 1824. After studying law in New York, he moved to Wisconsin to start a law firm. He then traveled to California during the gold rush and became a storekeeper. Leland found great financial success and became a wealthy man. The thriving industrialist presided over the Southern Pacific Railroad, Central Pacific Railroad, and Wells Fargo and Company. He also owned the Great Vina Ranch, which was the world's largest vineyard at that time. Often referred to as a robber baron, Leland Stanford left his mark on the state. A Republican, he served one term as the state's 8th governor and a U.S. senator. His interest in racehorses led him to the ownership and breeding in a breeding farm in Palo Alto, which eventually became the location of Stanford University. Leland and Jane Eliza Lathrop, his wife, founded Leland Stanford Jr. University on November 14, 1885, in honor of their deceased 16-year-old only child. With the couple's initial donation, the university was established and the first student admitted was Herbert Hoover. Over time, they donated over $1 billion in today's dollars to the school. The Stanford's 19th century grandiose mansion is within walking distance of the state capitol. Not only is their home a National Historic Landmark, it is the Leland Stanford Mansion State Historical Park, now a public museum. It is utilized as the official reception center for state-related political and social functions. On our guided tour of the mansion, we learned that Leland's small office was a frequent getaway for the former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. Inside that office are items in a credenza owned by former Governor Ronald Reagan. The furnishings and interior decor are exquisite. Golden Spike National Historic Site commemorates the joining of the Central Pacific and Union Pacific Railways at Promontory. The ocean-to-ocean rail link consummated the billion-dollar dream of the world's first transcontinental railroad. From Omaha, Nebraska, the rail extended 1,086 miles to Promontory Summit in Utah and 689 149 miles from Sacramento, California. The last of 6 million spikes were driven in the ground at 12:47 p.m. on May 10, 1869. 4 ceremonial spikes and a polished laurel wood railroad tie were placed on the rail for the history-making celebration. They were removed quickly for the insertion of the railworthy spikes and tie. Accompanied by loud applause, 2 crew bosses swung the final blows to the last permanent spikes. That last spike instantly made the prairie schooner and immigrant trails obsolete by shortening a 6-month journey to around 1 week via railway coach, an epic point in American history. This is a National Historic Civil Engineering landmark. The Golden Spike is on display at the Stanford University Museum in Palo Alto, California. Leland Stanford was the president of Central Pacific Railroad at the time of the wetting of the rails. Prior to the joining, Central Pacific locomotives were built in Schenectady, New York, then dismantled and shipped around the South America's Cape Horn to San Francisco. Then the locomotives were lowered upriver to Central Pacific headquarters in Sacramento and reassembled. Cheyenne, Wyoming became the territorial capital in 1869, and it is the state's most populated city. The Renaissance Revival Capitol was built between 1886 and 1890, and it is a National Historic Landmark. Bronze statues of the nation's first female Justice of the Peace, Esther Morris, stands in the state capitol yard and in the U.S. Capitol National Statutory Hall. On September 7, 1890, Laramie resident Louisa Ann Swain became the first American woman to cast a vote, earning Wyoming the nickname the Equality State. Wyoming was also the first state to elect a woman governor. The classy-looking checkerboard tile interior flooring is Vermont black marble and Italian white marble. And speaking of Vermont marble, I want to encourage you to listen to my Saturday Travel and History Tip. There are 2 parts on the Vermont Marble Museum and the history of marble in Vermont and the United States. In another Saturday Travel and History Tip, we visited Seneca Falls, the birthplace of women's rights, and where the first convention for women's rights was held, and the National Park Service. But back to the main point of these Saturday Travel and History Tips. 1, I want to show you the interaction of how grand our nation is and its history. We are going to talk about the Grand Hotels in New Hampshire. But just that one section that was talking about that period of time intertwines so much of American history from California to New Hampshire. Continuing on. In the White Mountains of New Hampshire, tourism was on the rise, mostly made possible by the rapid expansion of rail travel throughout the Northeast. By 1869, there were hundreds of hotels and inns in the region, 2 of them on the summit of Mount Washington, and the most luxurious of them were known as the Grand Hotels. To serve visitors to the Cog Railway, Sylvester Marsh built the Fabian House at the top of Bay Station Road. It burned during construction but was rebuilt and finally opened in 1874. The hotel was destroyed by fire in 1951, a fate sadly shared by most other 19th century wooden hotels. New Hampshire's remaining Grand Hotels are the Mountain View Grand, the Balsams, the Mountain Washington Hotel, and Wentworth by the Sea. We have been to Mountain View Grand, the Balsams, and the Mount Washington Hotel, and soon hope to go see Wentworth by the Sea. Wentworth by the Sea is a historic Grand Resort Hotel in Newcastle, New Hampshire. It is part of the Marriott Hotel Systems. It is one of a handful of the state's surviving Gilded Age Grand Hotels, and the last located on the seacoast. Joel and Bonnie White shared some information from this book to help with these Saturday Travel and History Tips. The Grand Resort Hotels of the White Mountains, A Vanishing Architectural Legacy by Bryant F. Tolles, Jr. It was published in 1998. On the cover is a picture of Mount Washington and the Balsams. See the stunning Balsams Grand Resort Hotel in Dixville Notch, perched on a mountainside graced with dozens of hiking trails. Years ago, the Dix House, as it was known, was a prime destination for weary sojourners on the Coas Trail. Since 1920, New Hampshire has held the first in the nation presidential primary. Since 1960, Dixville Notch has been the first community in the country to cast its handful of votes in national elections. At midnight, 100% of the eligible voters gather in the ballot room of the hotel to vote, which takes only a few minutes. We ate lunch at the country club's Panorama Grill, and we filled a glass with the fresh mountain spring water at the spring house near the resort's entrance. We also hiked a stretch of one of the winding trails near the lake. I'm sad to say that it has been closed since actually the year after we visited. It is being redeveloped, and as I read earlier, it was founded in 1866 as the Dix House. The Balsam was originally a small summer inn for weary Victorian travelers traversing the White Mountains, who discovered immense beauty, solace, and wonder. By the time the Hale House was added in 1895, well-heeled executives and their families arrived by railroad and were so enchanted by the resort they would stay for months at a time. Over the course of a century, and with the construction of the Hampshire House in 1916, the Balsams had grown to a resplendent 400-room grand resort. And again, it is not open to the public. It is still under undergoing renovation. The redevelopment does include restructuring the historic Dix House and renovating the historic Hampshire and Hale houses, as well as the acclaimed Panorama Golf Course and Clubhouse, designed by pioneering golf course architect Donald Ross. It was a rainy day when we went, and as they say here, this was farm to table before farm to table was popular. And here are a few pictures off the balcony of the legendary Donald Ross 18-hole golf course. Dixville Notch, first in the nation. New Hampshire has held the first in the nation presidential primary since 1920, with the first presidential beauty contest in 1952. Our citizens have personally met the candidates and by popular ballot have declared their preference for their party's nominee. Since 1960, Dixville has been the first community in the state and country to cast its handful of votes in national elections. And here's a picture of the room where the ballots are cast. This is the trailhead that we took to reach the top of Table Rock, where the bird's eye view of the Balsam's Dixville Notch was taken in 1990. Next week, we will talk about the Mountain View Grand and the Mount Washington Resort. In week 3, we will take you to the ruins of 2 of the grand hotels that no longer exist, one in New Hampshire and one in Vermont. American history. Learn it. Love it. Appreciate it. Don't let them steal our history. Treasure our American history. As you can see just in this travel and history tip, how much our nation's history is intertwined and important. If you appreciate these Saturday travel and history tips, I want to encourage you to go back and watch previous Saturday travel and history tips. As I've mentioned just in this one, there are 5 or 6 that are intertwined with this particular one. We also do weekday nuggets that cover the topic of creation versus evolution. You can watch these videos on our Facebook page or on our YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the notification bell so that you will be alerted when new videos have been posted. Thank you.